Trump ally Lindsey Graham has just admitted the absolutely insane truth about Trump's military plans in Venezuela. Do I get to collect another Paul is Right award, or is it bad news for the United States? Maybe both. Let's get into it. By the way, guys, you might notice that being critical of the administration does not exactly endear you to sponsors. And that's why, of course, I rely on you guys to help me out on combatvetnews.com, right? We drop Tuesday and Thursday, uncensored combat videos, Q&As, whatever you guys want, essentially. And you guys that support me on here, I appreciate you so much. And bear in mind, of course, if you don't want to be get the public shout out, but you still want to support me, that's okay too. I get it. It's a tough time to support critics of the administration. And certainly they're making it easy to criticize them. In fact, it's so bad that even Fox News, who literally glazes Trump on a level that almost no other outlet is willing to do, but don't worry, CBS is close behind, is admitting that this is kind of absurd. Now, don't get me wrong. The Fox News editors made sure that the headline is absolutely kissing Trump's ass. Graham, this is a reference to Senator Lindsey Graham, a staunch Trump supporter, has said that Trump has, quote, all the authority he needs in Venezuela strikes, right? These, of course, are strikes against fishing boats operated by what seem to be multinationals and aren't really targeting the Venezuelan military. They're just sort of in the waters off Venezuela. Now, Graham said, now the actual write-up, though, is actually kind of sort of, this is what passes for critical in the Fox News ecosystem. Senator Lindsey Graham said that President Trump will brief lawmakers about military operations in the Caribbean as the president eyes land strikes against Venezuela as the next part of his crusade against drugs. Now, this is calling this a crusade against drugs is doing some real work, because literally later in the article, Graham admits that it isn't actually about drugs. Additionally, this is according to Graham, quote, Trump is ready for Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro to exit leading the country, according to Graham. When asked about whether a regime change was in motion, Graham answered affirmatively, quote, I think President Trump made a decision that Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, is an indicted drug trafficker, and it's time for him to go, unquote, Graham said Sunday. He continued, quote, that Venezuela and Colombia, suddenly Colombia is involved in this, have been safe havens for narco-terrorists for too long, unquote. Now, Maduro is a unelected dictator who continues to subscribe to false elections. For example, he'll hold elections, but if he doesn't win them, he simply says that the election was rigged and fake and that voting was fraudulent and that he's going to just remain in power, which is kind of rich, given that his, adversary Trump says the exact same thing. Now, the insane part is that even Fox News is admitting that although Trump has said at least 10 strikes his administration has launched against alleged drug boats are necessary to put drug traffickers and cartels on notice, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, this is from Fox News, have been ramping up pressure for additional oversight and evidence supporting the legality of the strikes, which implies, of course, that these strikes don't actually have any legal evidence. Now, bear in mind that the president is required to brief Congress in the event. Basically, to deploy the military, the War Powers Act requires congressional notification after a certain time, right? Now, why is this? Well, the War Powers Resolution or War Powers Act is a federal law that's meant to, so Congress has the power to declare war in the Constitution, but declare war is kind of subjective. And the problem during the Cold War was that Congress said, hey, wars can happen really quickly. It's not like the 1770s where, a European country sends a fleet to sail to you and it gets there in like 6 weeks. It's not like that anymore. Soviet ICBMs could be launched and the US could be in a global conflict in 45 minutes. So they said, here's the compromise, is the War Powers Resolution. It says that the US, the president, can send US armed forces into an action abroad, by a Congress statutory authorization or in case of a national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territories, possession, or its armed forces, and that Congress simply has to be notified within a certain period. The War Powers Resolution requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing armed forces to military action and forbids armed forces from remaining for more than 60 days with a 30-day withdrawal period without a congressional authorization for use of military force or a declaration of war by the United States, right? Resolution was passed by 2/3 of the House and Senate, overriding a Nixon veto. Now, right now, some have argued that the War Powers Resolution was violated in instances like Panama and Grenada. But the fascinating part is, again, that, well, the current representatives have said, hey, you guys, like, the White House owes us a notification on this, right? And again, this is actually kind of a compromise from Congress, right? To say normally they replace a declaration of war with a authorization for use of military force. And this is pretty generous. But here's the problem, is that President Trump has already exceeded this, right? These 10 strikes have taken place well over a 60-day period, and that he owes Congress at least notification of what is happening, right, within 48 hours, which he seems to have provided by publicly disclosing these strikes as far as we know. But he has not gotten congressional approval and authorization of use of military force within the 60-day window. He's trying to substitute that with a briefing, right? And again, when we look at the fact that even Fox News is acknowledging that, well, you know, there's some legal questions here, but of course, in classic Fox News fashion, they're trying to, again, say, meanwhile, lawmakers, including some Republicans, are seeking answers on the strikes. And then it rolls out Trump. It says, for example, Senators Adam Schiff, someone who Trump hates, Tim Kaine from Virginia, someone who Trump hates, and Rand Paul from Kentucky, a Republican, someone who Trump hates, right, introduced a War Powers Resolution that would bar U.S. armed forces from engaging in hostilities against Venezuela, which is not quite what it would say. It would say, hey, you just have to tell Congress, just get authorization for use of military force first, right? And again, the fact that Schiff accurately then is quoted as saying, quote, the Trump administration made it clear they may launch military action inside Venezuela's borders and won't stop at boat strikes in the Caribbean. Yeah, that's what the administration said, right? He continues, Congress has not authorized military force against Venezuela, and we must assert our authority to stop the United States from being dragged into a full-fledged war in South America, right? Trump, of course, I love this, buried at the bottom of the article, they say Trump has dismissed lawmakers' concerns about the legality of the strikes and said on October 14th that the alleged drug vessels are, quote, fair game because they are, quote, loaded up with drugs, right? So really a truly brilliant retort from the president. What I find hilarious is that even though that contains a lot of criticisms by Fox News standards, it's still pretty generous. And even CBS, you're seeing almost printing the almost exact same article, right? Including quoting, really rolling in the exact quote from Graham. And again, continuing to say, Mr. Trump suggested last week that land strikes are going to be next, and that the drugs coming in by sea are like 5% of what they were a year ago, with no evidence to back up the claim, as always. And right, that 43 people were killed reportedly in a strike just this morning, that actually another strike had another survivor. And despite the administration's claim that these are ultra dangerous narco terrorists presenting a danger to the United States so imminent that the U.S. government has to take immediate action and can only notify Congress. In fact, is not going to be notifying Congress, or is not going to be obtaining an authorization for use of military force. They're still just continuing their policy, just letting these guys go, right? Like, let's see if I can find the article. So again, here, right, we've got. All right, well, I can't see it here. Maybe it's on old CBS News. I'll be shocked if they put it on CBS News's homepage. Nope, of course not. But we know that in previous strikes against a drug boat, individuals were actually detained by the U.S. military, and then the U.S. military just let them go, which is preposterous, right? But it only makes sense, again, if this is about intimidation, this is about killing people to kill people, which is not what the U.S. military does. The U.S. military does not exist to kill people for no reason. It does not exist to violate the law, right? Now, again, as we've repeatedly said on this channel, this is the ghoulish continuation of a trend that started in the Bush era when they decided that the U.S. military got this very broad authorization for use of military force, basically no expiration date, and you can go anywhere in the world to pursue the terrorists that committed 9/11, which the Bush administration interpreted to say any Islamic extremist, right? And then in the Obama era, they actually found that they targeted some propagandists, right? Individuals who were not operationally terrorists, but were ideologically making YouTube videos supporting the terrorists, saying the terrorists are good. And it became really troubling because one of those individuals was a U.S. citizen named Anwar al-Awlaki. So a U.S. citizen whose crime was making YouTube videos, exercising his freedom of speech, was killed by the U.S. president via memo, which is insane. So it's only logical that now we have a U.S. president who goes, well, I can just murder anyone I want, right? Because remember, there are lots of dual citizens floating around the world, right? And if you're a U.S. citizen and you join the Venezuelan military and then you shoot at a U.S. service member, nobody feels bad. You're a combatant in a conflict, right? The law of war trumps U.S. domestic law, and you're just going to get shot by the military, right? You're going to get blown up by an F-16 or whatever. And good riddance, right? But the problem is that what if you're a U.S. citizen and you're engaging in the crime of drug smuggling, right? The U.S. government doesn't have the right to just commit an extrajudicial killing of you, right? Especially if all you're doing is driving a boat. You're not trying to shoot law enforcement, right? Often, law enforcement, again, has the right to protect themselves, and that's why they carry weapons, and the right to protect third parties, right? But if you're not putting anyone in imminent danger by driving a boat, and so the U.S. government can't just blow up boats because one day they're going to say, shit, one of those people was a dual U.S. citizen, especially if they're smuggling drugs into the U.S. And if that happens, well, then you've got this really uncomfortable thing where the U.S. government is just instituting a new policy that says, well, if you're just driving a boat that we think might be full of drugs, and we being the U.S. military, who's, by the way, never made a mistake in its life, it doesn't matter if you're a U.S. citizen, we're just going to kill you. You see how quickly this becomes a farce, a joke, right? And again, just like killing non-combatant boats for no reason, it doesn't make sense. But you know what does make sense? That this is part of a regime change operation by the U.S. government. And as we've discussed, the peace president Trump really, if your goal is to disrupt a cartel, why are you going to disrupt, why is removing a head of state essential to that? And again, what percentage of drugs going into the United States transit through the group Tren de Aragua? And if that is worthy of a carrier strike group and deposing a head of state, well, then you should also be targeting the Mexican head of state. You should also be going after the Mexican president. In fact, you would have to basically systematically invade and overthrow countries all across South and Central America. And the absurd part is that, let's see if we can find this little chart here, right, of opium production in Afghanistan by year. And you'll see that there is just a smidge of a problem, right? As you can see, the U.S. government invading a country to stop it from engaging in drug production actually, fails pretty epically, right? So you can see that here's a steady increase in drug production. The Taliban banned it actually just before the U.S. invasion, and then the U.S. actually booted them out. And you can see that during the entirety of the U.S. occupation in Afghanistan, there was a steady rise in opium production, a small decrease during the surge, and then a return. And towards the end of the war, you see opium production was basically the sole crop operating in Afghanistan. So if your goal is to reduce drug trafficking, invading a country, deposing its leadership, and trying to build a new government from scratch over a 2-decade occupation, and $1 trillion, by the way, $1 trillion, guys, to triple Afghan drug and opium production. So I got to say, again, this administration doesn't do homework. They just operate on sort of vibes, but the vibes are bad. The vibes are bad, and they're looking worse. So again, if you hate the Constitution, you love these policies. If you hate drug trafficking, these policies, though, also kind of suck, right? If you're a trafficker, you are like, get the legitimate government out of this country. They cannot wait for it. You don't understand. Drug traffickers love instability. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you to GMAT Club, Henry Russier, James Porsche, Paul, Peter Fucci, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. We couldn't do it without you guys. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.